how to get past things like apathy and anger and some of those different kinds of things that people have issues with, that we all struggle with. And so I hope that you'll come and come learn. We're going to talk about anxiety, just different types of struggles that we all have that kind of common to human nature. So please plan on joining us. Services normally we have one at 10:40, so come and join us for that. This morning I wanted to start. I was thinking. I have this friend, and she didn't know it for a long time, but she had cataracts. Has anybody in here ever had cataracts? Raise your hand if okay, a few of you had. I've never had cataracts, but my best guess at what it's like is, remember when you were a kid and you would go swimming and you would swim underwater at the pool, and they always put tons of chlorine in the pool because you know what kids do in pools, right? And I mean, the pool's just totally filled with chlorine, and you're under there. And if you're like me, you swim with your eyes open, and you're there all day long, swimming with your eyes open. And as a kid, you would like stay under the water until your eyeballs started to like hurt, right? Like somebody was stinging them with a bee, and so much so that you'd want to scrape your eyeballs out at the end because it just hurt so bad. And when you would come out of the water, this is what I imagine having cataracts to be like. You'd come out, and everything would be hazy and foggy. You remember that as a kid? Everybody kind of back there, swimming pool in summer. And that's what I imagine having cataracts would be like. Well, my friend didn't know that she had cataracts. And so she was driving around, she was going to work, and from what I understand, cataracts just kind of slowly, progressively get worse and worse. And so there's this point where you don't really, it's kind of the old analogy of the frog in the kettle and turning up the water slowly, that you don't really realize that the water's getting hotter. She didn't really realize that her cataracts were getting worse and worse because she didn't know she had them, and her vision was getting worse and worse and worse. Actually, she was driving around and she was doing her work and all that things, and she finally saw an eye doctor or whatever, and he told her that she had cataracts, and they took her and they did surgery and they removed the cataracts, and they take them off, which is an amazing thing that we can even do that in our culture. And she said it was like all of a sudden seeing for the first time, kind of, I'm putting my own words on the story, but she could see for the first time, and she all of a sudden realized just how dangerous she had been driving around town, right? Because she couldn't see a thing beforehand. She was blind and she was driving around. She didn't know it because it just slowly progressed and come on her. I was thinking about that and about you and me, and all, we're talking today about our flaws and how every one of us is really, if we're honest with ourselves, are deeply flawed. But the reality is most of us have it's how we get through the day. Is we have these almost like mental cataracts that keep us from seeing just how messed up and flawed we are. You know how I know it? How many of you work with people who are messed up and flawed? Everybody raise your hand. Yeah, everybody does, right? Everybody's like, yes, I got this one coworker, man, if I just give you 5 minutes with him, then you would know how good I really am. We all work, but if I were, now I've kind of set you up, if I had asked you how many of you are flawed and messed up, you might not have raised your hand so quickly. You'd say, I'm a pretty good person. I've got it kind of together. I mess up sometimes, but I'm not the worst person out there. The reality is you and I are just as flawed and messed up as every other person that we work with. We just may be better at hiding it. I know this for a fact because if I could invent a machine that you could hook up diodes to your head, I don't even know what a diode is, but I assume you can hook them up to your head. If you could hook up diodes to your head and somebody could turn a few knobs, and then over this, it would hook up to a loudspeaker, and every single thought that you were thinking would come out of that loudspeaker. Would any of you be willing to do that for just 30 minutes? Just let the thoughts that are inside your head, you know why you wouldn't? Because we are flawed and messed up. I would never let you hear what's going on in my head, right? Because it's like this jumble of like, chocolate, oh, I can't believe they're doing that. Oh, chocolate, no, I can't believe they're doing that. That's like what goes through your head all the time. It's craziness, it's messed up, it's flawed. And you are taking all of that and you're mitigating what comes out of here, aren't you? Because we're all flawed. We're all messed up. Actually, one of the ways that I would say this is that we are all offenders and the offended. We all are bearing this burden and weight of all the flaws that we carry. Every single one of us is offending, and we are offended ourselves. And if you think about it, really start to think about it, one of the problems with kind of that mental blindness that we put on, the mental cataracts that we all take over our flaws, is that you don't recognize that when you blew up in anger, that you put on the cataracts and you don't see it anymore, but the person that you blew up at still feels all of that anger. They still feel all of the heat. They're still worried every time that they're around you, and they walk kind of gingerly around you. You don't recognize at that time that you broke confidence with your friend, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, why are you so upset that I told them? Why are you so upset that I said anything? You put on your cataracts, and your friend, you know what they're thinking? I will never trust him again. I will never trust her again. You think that your abuse, yeah, it was one time I did it, I should have never done it, but you don't know that your children now cower, and inside of them, inside their heart, there's something broken by the way that you treated them, their dad, their mom. You don't know what it does to your spouse every time that you say, man, he is good looking. I wish that You don't know what it does to your spouse every time you start talking about some piece of anatomy on another lady that's not your wife, right? Every time she's going, I just don't measure up. I'll never be good enough. And you and I come to every day of life, and we put on these mental cataracts, and we hide just how flawed we are, but we are all incredibly good at pointing out everybody else's flaws. Yeah? That's who we are. But the reality is that we're all the offenders and the offended. We're all bearing the burden and weight of the flaws that we carry. We all have hurt other people, and we all are carrying that burden. Sometimes I think because we have all lived with these flaws so long that we've just kind of grown to expect that this is who I am and this is how it has to be. Yeah, it makes sense. Like, I'm just this person. I've even heard people say that. Like, don't try to change me. This is who I am. And what they're really saying is, screw you. I'm going to be a jerk if I want to, and it doesn't matter. I'll just do whatever I want. That's what people are really saying. But I wondered if it has to be like this. Does it actually have to be like this? What if there was a different way for us to live? What if there was a different way? This morning, I want to take us to a different way because I think there is a way to take off the cataracts and actually deal with the flaws that we have and actually come out the other side and have some change happen. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take kind of a strange journey to get there. We're going to go back 2,000 years before today to Jesus. That's why we come together for church. And we're going to look at some predictions that Jesus made that were really odd. If you're a Christian, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I know all these. If you're relatively new to church, you're going to be going, this sounds crazy to me, what you're going to talk about. Because here are the predictions. I'm going to give them up front. Then we're going to look at one instance of that, although Jesus said this 3 times. And he also hinted at it several other times. But here's the prediction. The first one is this. Jesus said, I'm going to die. Now, that's not super spectacular, right? Everybody turn to your neighbor and say, I'm going to die. All right? You just made a prediction that will come true someday. All right? So that's not super spectacular. You'd have been like, oh, okay, Jesus. You know, whatever you say, buddy. That's not super spectacular. But what is spectacular is that in Jesus' prediction, now you probably know the rest of the story. So for you, it doesn't seem that spectacular. But he says, 3 days later, I'm going to raise from the dead. That's spectacular. That's the kind of thing that nobody believes. I want to read this for you. This is a passage that comes out of Matthew. It's Matthew 16, 21 through 23. It says this. This is the first time that Jesus mentions this. It's the first time that he talks and he gives this prediction to his disciples. He says this, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, the place where everything happens, the temple's there. And he says this, and he will suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And that he must be killed and on the 3rd day be raised to life. So Jesus says, I'm going to go there. All of the religious leaders are going to kill me. And then I'm going to be raised to life on the 3rd day. This is how his disciples respond. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. You ever confronted somebody who, like, they're doing something and you just think it's dumb that they're doing it? You're like, you need to stop that. This is what Peter is about to do. I can't prove this, but does anybody have a friend that's like Eeyore off of Winnie the Pooh? You know, like, you ask them how they're doing and they're like, well, I guess it could be better. And you're like, what happened to Eeyore? They're like, well, I found some hair in my cereal. You're like, okay, it'll be all right, buddy. Just get another bowl of cereal. You know, I think that Peter kind of thinks Jesus is being an Eeyore. That he's like, everything's going hard, it's going wrong. People are trouble, and there's just like some things are good, some things are bad. And I think Peter looks at him and he's going, don't be down, don't be depressed. Peter tries to encourage him and he says this, never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. And this is what Jesus says. This is one of those moments where I would have loved to have watched what happened. Because Jesus says this. He turns to Peter and he said, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You would have been like, oh no, he did it, right? Because this is like intense moment. Peter's trying to encourage Peter, and Jesus will not let, Peter's trying to encourage Jesus, and Jesus, I'm getting all confused. Jesus will not let Peter do it. He calls him Satan, and he says, you're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Who in their right mind would have heard Jesus say, I am going to get killed by all the religious leaders, and then I'm going to raise from the dead? Who in their right mind would have heard that and just been like, okay, sounds good. If I came in here and said, I'm going to die, all the elders in our church are going to kill me, and then after that, I'm going to raise from the dead, you guys would be like, you're cuckoo. You are a nut, Kent, right? But we read this from kind of our perspective, and we go, oh, no big deal. But people don't just rise from the dead on their own, especially after 3 days. I want you to get how significant this prediction is. How significant it is that Jesus knows this. And here's some of you, maybe you're kind of like, I'm a little bit of a skeptic at heart. Like I a lot of times I'm like, I don't believe that. You can talk to my wife. Anytime people start talking about oils and stuff like that, I always turn to her and I go, it's hocus pocus. Now, maybe you like oils and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. But I'm a skeptic deep down at heart. I'm always like, hocus pocus. I'm calling hocus pocus. And so when I read this kind of stuff, I go, I don't know. Is that just hocus pocus? Like Jesus said that he's going to raise from the dead. Maybe they wrote that after the fact, or maybe they're trying to trick me into being a Christian, right? Here's the problem for me. These guys, after this first encounter where Jesus says this, they will be told 2 more times Jesus is going to predict his own death and his own resurrection, and he is going to get even more clear. He'll say, these are the religious leaders that are going to do it, and then they're going to hand me over to the Romans, the Gentiles, and they're going to kill me. And Jesus will predict it over and over again. And here's what gets me. If these guys are trying to trick me, they're not very good at it. Because they say in their own eyewitness accounts, we didn't understand what the heck he was talking about. We didn't get it. See, Jesus often talked in parables, and he'd be like, there once was a farmer, and he would tell some story, and he'd make a spiritual application out of it. And these guys, I think they're going, I don't know if this is just a story or not, but part of their eyewitness testimony is they say, and we were all afraid to ask him. You know, it hit me this week. Do you know why they were afraid to ask him? Because the first time Jesus says this, Peter, do you remember what he said? Lord, never. And what does Jesus do? He's like, you're Satan, right? You wouldn't ask either. You'd be like, man, don't even touch Jesus. Something about that one that Jesus is a little touchy on, right? Don't know. He could call you Satan, Jack. And so they leave it alone. And these guys look like dopes. Because when Jesus dies and he's in the grave for 3 days, do you know what they're doing? They are hiding. They have gone back to fishing. These guys, they don't believe him at all. They're not good, credible witnesses unless what they're saying is really true. And then it sounds exactly like eyewitness testimony, doesn't it? Because nobody in here would believe that somebody would rise from the dead on their own, especially after 3 days. See, Jesus believed this so much in this prediction that the night when he eats, remember at communion we talked about him passing the cup and the bread and how I think they would have been like, okay, this is another one of those weird ones, right? Where Jesus is telling us to eat his body and drink his blood, and this is super weirdo. And then Jesus, they pass that, and then they go to this garden because Jerusalem would have been packed at this time of year. It's the Passover. Everybody's there for the Passover. And so they are camping out in a garden because everything's just packed. And so they're out camping. And what do you do when you camp? You do some s'mores around the campfire, and then you go to sleep, right? But that's not what Jesus is doing this night. Because Jesus knows in a few hours he is going to be taken, tried, and die. And so what does Jesus do? He says to his friends, boys, if you guys would please just pray with me tonight. I'm going to go pray. Please just stay awake and pray with me. Jesus goes off, and the guys, I'm sure they said like a couple prayers, and then they were like, okay, he's not coming back. I'm going to sleep. And they go to sleep. Jesus, do you know what he's doing? It's not just another night of camping for him because he knows, he is predicting this moment. He is off, and he is what you would expect of a person who is about to die. He is saying, oh God, if there's any way to take this cup from me, please take it. If there's anything else, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. But if there's any way to take it, take it. Actually, Luke, who was a doctor, one of the eyewitness accounts, he says that Jesus was sweating drops like blood. There is actually, I can't remember the name of it right now, you could look it up later, but there is a medical condition where somebody is under such intense stress that the capillaries in their sweat glands will actually burst and blood will start to come out in their sweat. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what Luke is trying to mention or not, but he does say that he sweat these drops that look like blood. And here's Jesus in this intense agony, because you know what he knows that they don't know? He knows that in just a few hours, one of his best friends is going to come up to him, and he's going to kiss him on the cheek and sell him out. Guards are going to come, and they're going to grab Jesus, and they're going to take him, and he'll go before different religious leaders and kind of political leaders, and they're going to take Jesus, and they're going to brutalize him. They're going to take rods and they're going to hit him until things like his jaw gets dislocated. I don't know if that happens, but you got to imagine it would have. They're going to do things like they're going to make fun of him because he claimed to be a king, so they said, and they're going to wrap a crown of thorns. They're going to make thorns. Have you ever felt thorns? I got one earlier this week, and like a little tiny baby splinter in my hand, and like all week long I was like, can you please get the splinter out? Because I'm a baby. And Jesus had thorns driven down onto his head. They did things like this. You predict things, right? And they blindfolded him, and they hit him in the face, and they would say things like, predict who just punched you then. Give me your prediction, Messiah. And they would hit him and beat him, and they would whip him. And the whip, I explained this last week a little bit, but it was a whip that had these 9 tails on it. And it had bones, and it had fragments of glass, and it had rocks in it, and on those weaved into it. And when it would wrap around the side, and it would kind of, those things would catch on you, and when they'd rip it off, it would rip your skin. And it would rip it open, and blood would be seeping out. And the Romans said that if you took 40 of those lashes, it would kill you. So they would always do 40 minus 1. They take you right to the brink of death. And Jesus knows he is in this garden in agony. He is going to be taken and he's going to be nailed to old, rough pieces of wood after he has gone through and 24 hours. He's going to have been up all day and all night. No sleep for him. No rest. He is going to be nailed to the cross, nails through his wrists, through his feet. There's actually, you can go to Jerusalem today, and they found a heel bone of somebody who had been crucified, and it still has the nail stuck in the bone. You could go see something like that. Jesus will go through incredible agony, and he will hang there, and he won't die because of the nails. He won't die because of all of the pain that has been brought on him. He'll die of asphyxiation because he cannot, all his weight will hang on his arms that will put all of his body weight on his chest. And to take a breath, he will have to push against the nails and go until he can't push any longer. And he is sitting here on his knees, probably on his knees, on his face maybe, begging, Father, if there's any other way, do it. You notice the disciples are going? They're sleeping because they don't get it. He will die. The Romans were masters at this. They knew what they were doing. They knew that when somebody goes through that kind of agonizing death, that their heart will start to enlarge, and I think it's called the pericardium. I could be wrong, but it's kind of the sac around your heart. It will start to fill with fluid, and so the way the Romans checked to make sure you were dead was they'd stab you in the chest underneath your rib cage, and if blood and water both flowed, because all of the fluid that was surrounding your heart, if both of those things flowed, they knew that you were dead. They knew that your heart had given out. And so Jesus will die. He will be buried. He will be put in a tomb. A huge rock, this is how the Jews did it, a huge rock will be rolled in front of it because they would take their bodies, they would put them in for a year or so, however long, and then afterwards they would take their bones and they would gather the bones and put them in little boxes called ossuaries, and they would keep those. So they put Jesus in there so nobody will disturb his body. But what happens is on the third day, his prediction comes true, and Jesus rises from the dead like he said. I'm telling you, I'm a skeptic at heart, so I look at all this and I go, I don't know if I would believe it, except for the fact that, remember those guys who were asleep? Like, if you read the story and you really read it without all of predilections of being a Christian afterwards, or maybe being a skeptic, from this side of knowing the story. When you read it, you go, that's what would have happened. That's what would have happened. You would have had somebody who knew if he really was God, he would have known that he was going to die and raise from the dead. And these other people wouldn't have known it. They wouldn't have believed it. And so what would you do? He would be agonizing and they would be sleeping. He would be telling them and they'd be going, none of us, we didn't get it. He would be in a grave and they would have gone back to work and been hiding out from the authorities thinking they're next. That's what would have happened. So for me, I don't know if I would have believed it. I would be a skeptic, except that every single one of those guys, except for one, John, the Apostle John, who wrote the book of John in the New Testament, and a couple others, he himself was persecuted for believing that he saw Jesus raised from the dead, went through some incredible, agonizing, excruciating things, but didn't die for it. But all the other men who were these fools who didn't see it, who were like you and I would have gone, hey, this just sounds like hocus pocus. Every one of them went to their death believing that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. And not just believing it, because they claimed to have seen a risen Jesus. That, for me, as a skeptic, is the reason why I am a follower of Jesus. Because these men looked at it, they saw him, they were eyewitnesses. It always drives me nuts when you see a Bible show on like the History Channel, and they're like, we have no eyewitnesses. And I'm like, we have a lot of eyewitnesses. You're just not accepting them. But throughout history, they've been accepted. And even modern scholars who are atheists would say, yes, there's the New Testament, they'll say things like this. New Testament accounts are accurate records of what they thought they saw. Yeah, I'll give you that. Fine. But what they thought they saw was Jesus risen from the dead. And they died for it. They died for it. You would die for a lot of things, but a lie? No way. I heard somebody talking about Nixon and his scandal, and they said those men couldn't even hold it together for like 24 hours or something before the whole thing just fell apart, right? Because you can't hold together all of the lies that would come out of that. Something true had to be about it. So listen, this is what those guys believed about what happened with Jesus, is that they believed he had come to save the world and to turn you and I back home to God. I was thinking about this. If you think about the idea of God coming into the world, right? If you're God and you come into the world, you want people probably to know that you're God. You have a few options. You come down as a giant, right? And you like eat trees like they're broccoli. And you're like, oh, I'm God, worship me, right? You do something crazy like that. Or maybe you come down as a human, but you like zap stuff. And you're doing crazy stuff like that. But every one of the things that I could think of, you could probably come up with a million more. Every one of the things that I could think of would create incredible fear in the humans around you. But let's say you're a God who actually loves people. Let's say you're a God who really looks at the condition people are in. How would you come? And how would you prove to them that you were God? You'd probably have to do something like beat the one thing that nobody's ever beaten. Look at your neighbor again and say, you're going to die. You told them that I'm going to die. Now tell them you're going to die. Every one of us, it's the one inevitable that we're all going to face. And what blows me away is that Jesus came and he died. And when he rose from the dead, he proved that he had power even over death itself. He was God. And they believed it in what they believed. And this, if you're somebody who's like, I'm not sure if I believe in Christianity, I'm not sure if I believe even there is a God, but if there was a God, he would love us, he wouldn't want to punish us, all those kinds of things. If you're that kind of person, I totally get that. You should look at this and see that what the story is that God came to earth so that he could pay for your sins, so that he could bring you into a relationship with God, to remove the cataracts off your eyes, to see just how filthy and messed up we all are, so that he could heal you and fix you. Because that's what a God would do, right? If he was really a God, he would come out of that kind of love. It reminds me of, you guys have time for one last story? Right? Okay. Yeah, you have to, because I'm up here. It would be rude to just leave. It reminds me of when I was a youth pastor. I used to work with teenagers. It was such a fun job, man. We did crazy stuff all the time. And so we were at this camp. It was called Camp Boondockers. And Boondocker was by a lake. And the game was this, that I had a tiki torch, and all the kids were given birthday candles. And they were supposed to find me. I would hide somewhere. They were supposed to find me. This was at night. they were supposed to light their birthday candle off of my tiki torch, and then they had to get it about 200 yards to somebody else, some other adult, and whoever could get their candle back lit was the winner, all right? But if you are a middle schooler, like I was a middle schooler, you try to blow out everybody else's candle, right? Because middle schoolers are just jerks. And so as you would light it, somebody else would blow it out, and you're trying to get it, and everybody's just going crazy. So we decide, all the adults are like, what if we hide Kent down by the lake? And so I'm down by the shore of the lake, and there was kind of this berm of mud over here, probably 6 to 8 feet tall, and I'm hiding behind that. And the kids had to come around that berm and come down to me. And so I'm standing there. I've got my tiki torch. The kids are hunting. You can hear them they're like cattle, kind of, right? And you're like, oh no! All the stinky armpits are coming my way. And there's this stampede. All of a sudden, one of them's like, I see him! And all of these kids come running around, and I'm like, ah! Because millions of stinky armpits coming at me. There are probably 100 of them, but they're all coming at me, and I'm just standing there trying to keep kids from dying. I'm like, stop pushing her, stop! And they're lighting their candles, and they're all around me, and there's just literally 100 kids just moving around me in this crazy circle. I'm just like, this was a bad idea. Fire in middle schoolers, this is trouble. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I hear this, I'm stuck! And I look over, and there's this sweet little girl with stinky armpits, and she is stuck up to her knees in mud. Because what you know, and what I now know, I didn't know at that time, was that land near the edge of the lake may look dry on top, but underneath it's been soaking water up, right? And you have 100 kids stampeding around you, and they are just turning it into sloshy mud. And then all of a sudden, it just wasn't one kid. I start hearing, I'm stuck too! And I'm stuck! And I'm stuck! I was looking around, and no kids were moving. It was like some kind of weird Disney thing. They're all like this, and they're all stuck up to their knees in their mud. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so I start literally reaching my arm around, because where I was standing was the only solid piece of ground left, because I hadn't moved. I had just been standing there. And so I started reaching down, and I would kind of plop a kid out. Thankfully, most middle schoolers are still pretty tiny, so I'd plop them out, and then I would kind of hand them over to another adult, and they'd take them, and I'd plop another one out. And then this kid that I had plopped out, they would be like, ooh, and they'd come back into the mud, because, middle schoolers. And I would plop them, and I was plopping kids out I don't remember how long it took. We were all washing mud off of us and trying to get clean. And I thought about you and I and how all of us are flawed, every one of us. And every one of us needed somebody who was outside of the system to come to us and plop us out of the mud that we're stuck in. Because if you and I really sat down and started writing down all your flaws, if we could hook those diodes up to your head and hear just what goes through your mind in just a 30-minute period, every one of us would say, I'm stuck in the mud. I'm stuck in it. See, the Bible actually says this. This is a little harrowing if you actually take the Bible for truth. It says that the wages of sin, all of our offense, is death. Now, I say it's not because God wants to kill us, but because stuck people can't save themselves. They need a Savior. You're stuck. You got it? You can't fix it. If you're covered in mud, you can't wipe the mud off. There's no way to get it off, and there's no way to get out of it. You need somebody outside of that to pull you out. So what does God do? He becomes a man. He predicts his own death and resurrection, and then makes good on the prediction. Why? So he can rescue you from the mud. He can rescue you from all of the built-up years of your anger and deceit. He can rescue you from all of the terrible things that you've done, all of the terrible things that you've said, all the terrible things that you regularly get caught up in. He could take this life. I remember as I got older, before I became a Christian, I remember as I kind of was getting older and older, going, this isn't what life was meant to be. I felt this incredible emptiness. Everything was pretty good. I had a good family, had people who loved me and cared about me, but there was something inside of me that was like, there's something missing inside of me. And there's got to be something more. And when I found out that there was really a God and that God really loved me enough that he would come and pluck me out of the mud and offer me a new life, that changed everything for me. It transformed me. And so this morning, I want to just say this to you, that Jesus, I heard somebody say this and I liked it, that Jesus makes life better, and he makes you better at life. That's what Jesus does. He makes life better. He gives you hope. He gives you peace. He gives you forgiveness. He transforms you. He gives you a brand new life. He frees you from all. Remember, he takes that old death warrant that was written for you, the wages of sin is death. He takes it and he nails it to his own cross. He dies for you to give you hope and to give you life. And he then helps you learn how to live life the way God always intended it to be lived. That's powerful stuff. That's not come and be some yo-yo weirdo religious fanatic. That's like real life stuff. Like that fills the hole in the gap that I was always looking for and that maybe you're looking for. We're not about trying to create religious fanatics in here. We're trying to create people who come back home to God and have followed Jesus with their whole life. This morning, maybe you have never given your life to Jesus in that way. Maybe you've never said, I need you. That I am messed up, where you do kind of this mental surgery and you take off the cataracts and you really look at yourself. You say, I am stuck in the mud and I need a Savior. This morning, I want to offer to you, I'm going to be standing in the back. I would love to just talk to you and share with you. You can pull me aside and we can just talk about that and talk about how do you actually accept Jesus and how do you make him Lord of your life. But it really starts with one simple thing of you just admitting that you need a Savior. Admitting that you're blind on your own. That you look at your life and you go, I don't know how I can make it another day without him. I don't know how I can keep living with the hole that's inside of me. The incredible oppressing sense that there's something more in this life. Jesus is the something more. And if you want to talk about that, I'm going to be in the back. We're going to sing a song. You're welcome to come during that. I also want to invite you in front of you. There should be a book that is a book called A Trail Guide to Following Jesus. And it's a free gift to you that you can just take. And it's an easy way for you to start exploring the Christian faith without having to really talk to somebody else. Just take that as our gift to you. If you need to talk, though, don't pass up this opportunity. I'll be in the back. Come and join me.